Ladies and gentlemen, it's Jeff Wilson here with Sean Kleisinger, somebody near and dear to my heart because he is the voice of Saturday Night Fights. He is the voice of Modern Fighting Championship. He is the voice of the Regina Red Sox. He's the voice of the Regina Rams, and he's also done some alternate work with the Regina Pats. Sean, how are you, my friend?
Good. How are you doing this morning?
Excellent. I appreciate you taking some time with me this morning and going through some of the technical things that we got to go through to get this set up. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
First of all, before we get going, my technical guys are always like, Jeff, you got to do something about your backdrop and everything behind you. And I'm looking at where you're at right now, and I'm like, that's the best sort of backdrop I've ever seen. Go through your office there a little bit about what we're seeing behind you right now, because it's kind of awesome.
Basically, I call it my museum, and I think there's probably about 70 or 80 bobbleheads in here. So it all kind of started back in 2010 when my dad and I went to Green Bay for the first time, and I remember spending I'm not going to say how much, but a whole lot of money in the pro shop. And then I remember we were driving his little Toyota Yaris home, and literally the whole car was just filled to the gills, full of Packers memorabilia. So that was kind of like the start of the museum, and every year kind of just a little piece gets added to it, and now here we are, I guess.
Man, it's awesome, and that's a Packers dream for sure. Cheeseheads and all, but we'll talk a little bit further about that after. But I'm excited to talk to you because you were like me. You sort of maybe stumbled into media and doing things like this. I'm excited to talk to you about that, Sean. But let's go back a little bit and tell me a little bit about your parents, where they came from, and growing up as a child.
Well, I think I'm born and raised in Regina, and my mom and dad, I think, have always allowed me to how do I say it, mold and grow into who I am today, kind of thing. And ever since I can remember, my dad and I have always shared that connection and that common denominator, if you will, of passion for sports and competition in general, really. And so I played a handful of sports growing up, and wouldn't have been possible for my mom and dad being there supporting me. So that's kind of where my passion and love from sports came from. It was because I wouldn't have been able to do any of this if it wasn't for my mom. I wouldn't have been able to play any sports growing up if it wasn't for my mom driving home at 5 p.m. after work just to rush home to take me to a ice hockey game or a football game or baseball game,
Yeah, it's amazing. So let's go back a little bit. So you've been in Regina your whole life. Your dad and your parent, what are their occupations?
My mom's she worked at SaskTel. She's retired now.
Okay.
My dad works at a Catholic school in the city here.
Okay. And then you start to get introduced to sports. What were some of the first ones that you tried, and then which are some of the ones that really stuck with you?
I'd say the first memories I have of liking sports is just it always being on TV, and more particular like a National Football League, and my love for baseball kind of developed on my own. No one in my family really liked baseball. It was just something I kind of picked up on my own, and now my mom and my dad are both pretty big baseball fans because of me. But going back, yeah, my very first memories of playing sports was the classic little kid who's like 2 feet high, running around playing with a soccer ball, and all the kids are running after the soccer ball at the same time, kind of thing. You know what I mean? So that's
Yeah.
kind of my very first memory of sports, and then from there, it just went on to, like I said earlier, hockey, football, etc.
Yeah, and so this is interesting because when we're kids, playing is all part of it, right? And I mean, for myself, I had an interesting childhood growing up. I mean, I lived in Africa for a year when I was in grade 5. So I was into martial arts. I tried to play soccer. I was terrible at it. I didn't really ever play hockey. I played football, and in that playing kind of thing really starts to develop a passion for sport and being a spectator. But you and I both, in some way, shape, or form here, you're the voice of so many different sporting events, and I'm sort of doing the MMA thing. Um, how how did your transformation happen? How did you decide to start becoming the voice of?
Uh, well, that passion, I think it comes from being competitive on the field or on the ice. Really, it just really opens the doors of love to the overall um, production that beauty sports brings. You know what I mean? There's so much more that makes competition so beautiful, just outside of the game of itself or the fight itself. In the MMA's case, whether it's broadcasting or just how sports can unite human beings. There's not many other field of endeavors that can really do that, in my opinion. So, yeah,
Yeah, I agree. Was there a moment where you sort of realized that, hey, I don't know, or was it a bunch of moments? Like I'll share. For me, people say, hey, how did you get into doing broadcasting and MMA stuff? And for me, it was like AJ was having his first amateur MMA fight, and Dennis Lawson and Daryl Svenner were doing commentary,
right.
and I was behind them, and I was walking around. I was just there to watch the event, and I was like, hey, guys, what's going on? And they're like, oh, just having fun. It was a break between the fights. And I said, and I walked over to them and I said, do you mind if I sit down and tell you the story about AJ and the guy he's fighting? Because I just found out that they dated the same girl. And so yeah, so I sat down and they turned to me and they're like, you know what, Jeff, we have no idea what we're doing. So it'd be great if you could do that. And that sort of started it off. And then Jeff Wiley and UMC started, and they flew me back to get that done. And then we start to develop it. Like, did you have a moment like that?
I wouldn't say a particular moment like that, but it was definitely something that just kept on. It's something that love that I've always had. Like growing up in the '90s as a big boxing fan, watching and listening to Michael Buffer and Jimmy Lennon Jr. and ringing out his bouts like Tyson versus Holyfield in '97 when Tyson bit Holyfield's ear off. I thought that was that was kind of my first introduction into boxing, and then in 2002. Listening to Michael Buffer and Lennon Jr. Event was so big they had a ring announcer announce a guy each in 2002 there. So I mean, literally, I would always be introducing these guys on my own time. I'd be walking home from school and I'd be announcing Mike Tyson out loud, and people would be driving by me and like looking at me all weird, like this guy must be really, you know. So, and then I would always do it in front of my friends at parties. If I had a lot of friends that play guitar and stuff, so they'd plug in a microphone into an amp. I'd pick up the microphone and then I'd start pretending I'm Michael Buffer. And all my friends always used to tell me that I needed to be a ring announcer someday because they thought I was good. They would laugh historically when I was doing it. I don't know if they were laughing at me or if they were laughing because they thought I was good. But so yeah, that love was always developing because I always something that really watching those boxing matches when I was a kid, you really catch the essence and the excitement of what boxing brings, and I felt that at a long age, and it carried on through.
Man, I love that story. And the reason is even today, I have two types of friends. And if they come over to my place and we're watching fights, I will commentate the whole fight. And they'll be somebody be like, what, he awesome. And other guys will go, shut the up. Like, so you get these two types of friends, and
Yeah.
some of them love it and some of them don't. And I mean, I'm an only child, so I was talking to myself the whole time I was growing up, so it was probably a lot easier for me. But I love that, and I think that's a really interesting thing that's happened to you. Whereas you're like, oh, you go to broadcasting school, you do a bunch of this stuff, you do that. Like, no, just sort of just fell into it, and then it just continued, and you're doing so well with all the opportunities that are happening right now. I think that's pretty amazing. Um, Public speaking is one of the top three fears for most people.
Right.
Did you ever experience that fear, or has it always been pretty easy for you?
No, to be honest, like I get just as excited with adrenaline and but at the same time calmness as when I did when I played sports. Like when I step foot in the squared circle with a microphone in my hand, I feel just like I'm under center again in a football game with in the fourth quarter with the game on the line. It's the same type of feeling for me. It's excitement. It's something that's natural. It's something I say to myself, hey, this is my time. I'm gonna bring something special to this game or event to make the overall experience a more memorable one. Not only for myself, but more importantly for the people in the crowd. And really, that's all I want the opportunity to do. Um, so to play a part and create some memories, and that's all possible because of how my parents allowed me to do what I wanted to do growing up, supported me, taking me to sporting events, and it was all just kind of like an evolution thing into what I am now.
Yeah, and continue to grow and be. Hey, talk to me a little bit about how like you've got a bucket list about ballparks, and you've been to a lot of them. But talk to me a little bit about that. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, so my very first ever Major League Baseball game I went to was in 2004. My dad and my brother went to Toronto, and we saw the Boston Red Sox play Toronto Blue Jays. And it was just one of those surreal moments. I was back when the Hard Rock Cafe was back in the Sky Dome. And I just remember the very first time going into the Hard Rock Cafe and laying eyes onto all the blue seats. And back then it was the Sky Dome before it was the Rogers Center. And it was just one of those surreal moments when when I saw it, it was like, I felt like I don't want to be cheesy, but it felt like I was like in heaven or something. It was like so surreal. You see it on TV all the time. So that really was a kickstart to me wanting to experience that more. And so it seems like every ballpark I go to, it has the same type of wow factor to it because you always see it on TV, and then once you finally get there, it's kind of just something that words can't describe of, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think some people get that, but you have also sort of become more and more and more. I think a lot of people, ask me, how did you continue to do all this stuff? And there's a lot of reasons why, but um, were people just calling you because you got this great voice, you got natural talent, and you got the ability to always go forward and get that done, or did you have to do some hustling?
To be honest with you, the center ring promotions really was a thing that was kind of like my first uh, thing to get me involved and open the other doors that I've been able to walk through since then. Because I remember I was going to school at Western Academy Broadcasting College in Saskatoon in 2016, and I remember I had a friend. I think he sent me a Facebook message, and then he said he knew of a promoter that was looking for a ring announcer for his professional mixed martial arts promotion. And like I was saying before, growing up, I would always do this kind of stuff in front of my friends at parties or at recess. I would always announce names, Mike Tyson, whatever, Conor McGregor. So I said, hell yeah, I want to. Like I told him, like that's kind of like a thing that I've always wanted to do, and I think I'm decently good at it. So he passed my name on to AJ, and I remember sitting in my room in Saskatoon. It was probably not even as big as a boxing ring or an MMA ring. It was just a tiny little cubicle. And I was sitting there with my iPhone in my hand, doing recordings and sending them to Kelly Marsh, the producer for Saturday Night Fights, Modern Fighting Championship, and AJ, and they listened to it, and they liked what I had in store, and then I made my debut for Saturday Night Fights on May 28th, 2016. That was Saturday Night Fights 11, and since then I've done four events for them, and hopefully more in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you're a guy, and Kelly Morris always speaks so highly of you. And one of the things that I love about you is that when we're doing events together, we all sit at the same table. We're doing our commentary. You're doing the ring announcing. You got papers to do this. You are what's the word? You're never really asking very many questions. You got it handled. You're like, okay, this is what I got to do, and I got to go do it. And there's no like, hey, what's this? How do I do this? How do I do that? And so you had this immediate level of professionalism that happened and was awesome when we get there. Can you talk about one of the let's say one of the most difficult times that you had when you were, one of the most embarrassing times, or one of the times where you had to go really think on your feet, not maybe with us and Saturday Night Fights and Centering Promotions, or maybe in the other ones where it didn't go so well or it did go really well? It's up to you.
Well, definitely the Saturday Night Fights 11, my very first event. If I didn't look nervous, I was nervous as hell out there. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, because that was really the first time I've ever done anything like that in front of 1,000 people, right? I'm used to doing it in front of my friends at a party in a dark basement with karaoke going in the background or whatever. So like that was kind of that moment for me. But I'd have to say after the first few names were announced, I think I settled in pretty good and just realized that, hey, this is just a microphone. I'm going to pretend these people are my friends, kind of thing, I guess. As cheesy as that sounds, but that's kind of the approach I took to it.
Yeah, no, and you didn't at all. It was, you're immediately rock and rolling. And I remember one time, I think there was a pronunciation issue with the card or something, and man, I pronounce stuff wrong all the time, and I do something, and I sort of just roll with it. And you were like, oh man, and then I don't think you've ever made a mistake since that one moment. Like, it really bothered you. It showed a high level of professionalism. I thought that was awesome. So how did these doors open for you from that to Regina Rams, Regina Red Sox? Like, how did that happen?
Red Sox started off last year before the season started. I have a friend that used to do some field announcing for Mark Johnston. He works at a radio station here in Regina, and he was no longer doing that because he was too busy, and so he recommended me to Gary Brotzel, the team president of the team, and Gary called me up, and then first few games I kind of just stood around and shadowed the situation, and then after that I got my opportunity, and ever since then I've been doing the public address announce for Curry Field there. So that's how the Red Sox kind of got going. And then for the Regina Rams, I'm fortunate enough to have a couple of my best friends play on the Regina Rams, and they also kind of put my name in there. And for the last couple of years, I've been spotting for Joe Hattisbeck, the full-time PA announcer. And then this year, he kind of passed on the torch, if you will, and said it's kind of my time to do it. So I'm going to be doing all the home games this year. So yeah, it was kind of just all like connected dots, just kind of knowing good people, getting the opportunity, and when I did get the opportunity, to kind of just make the most of it, and it all just comes down to preparation, I think. So over the years, I've been waiting for these moments, and
yeah, and excelling when they show up, and that's amazing. And then when everything starts to roll, and it seems like in everybody's life, when everything starts to go really, really well, there's an obstacle or a roadblock that pops up, and all of a sudden you announce something on Facebook, and we're all like, oh man, because we don't really know how to react. Do you want to talk about that
Yeah.
moment and what was going through your head, and then where you're at now?
Yeah, for sure. So back in 2016, like I was saying, I was going to school in Saskatoon, and um, I would walk to school every day, and I would always get these weird sensations in my legs and my lower back. And first, I thought I just had a pinched nerve or something, but um, I was going through that um, for the last 3 or 4 months of school there, and I was actually doing the first Saturday Night Fights 11 on the May 28th, 2016, not knowing what was wrong with me. But I remember getting into the ring that night, and every time I would bend over the ropes, I'd get this shooting pain in my spine and my legs, like every single time I went in and out of the ring. And so I remember after that night, I thought to myself, I gotta go to the doctor and get this checked out, kind of thing. So I eventually went to a neurologist, had an MRI, and then I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so yeah, ever since then, I've been on medication and this and that, and I feel like it's pretty much under control. I think that the toughest thing, honestly, was not knowing what it was when it was happening. But once you find out, of course, it's going to be a shock. But I think it's easier to deal with once you know what's going on, and then you have a plan in place to treat it. Unlike before, like I was saying, when I was going to school, I had no clue what was going on. And that's the lonely feeling. It's not so much lonely now when you know what's happening and you have support and you're on medication stuff. I think the toughest part's behind me.
Yeah, that's it's a great, this may be a terrible analogy, but they say the punch that knocks you out is the one you don't see. And if you can see something coming, you can kind of prepare for it. And in your case, having, not knowing is the kind of thing that kind of, like, exactly like you said, can really make you crazy, or make you not be able to defend what it is. Whereas when you see it coming, I think that's awesome. And I know that my cousin Faye actually has MS and is doing well, but it is a tough sort of situation. And you've got a bucket list of ballparks that you've gone to. You talked a little bit about the first one, but how many ballparks are there, and how many have you've been to now?
So there's there's 30 teams, so there's 30 stadiums, and I've been to 13 out of 30. But the Texas Rangers, unfortunately, are getting a new ballpark, so I have to take one of those off the list, and then someday I have to get back there to get to the new parks. I hate when that happens, when I go to a stadium and then they announce that they're getting a new one, because it kind of just cuts down my list. So yeah, I've been to 13 out of 30, and hopefully this summer I'm thinking of going to New York City, and I haven't been to New York yet to see Yankees, Mets, and maybe down to Philadelphia. Those are my next kind of three. So that, yeah, it's always been a passion of mine. Like I said earlier, the very first time I saw a major league ballpark, it was one of the best moments of my life for sure. And every time I get to one, it's in essence the same feeling. So something that I love doing.
Amazing. I don't want to get you in any trouble, but what's, of the ballparks you've gone to, what's maybe the worst one? What's the best one, and why?
Well, by far the worst would have to be the Oakland Coliseum, where the Oakland Athletics play. It's not fan friendly at all. You're very far from the field. It's really cold when you walk into the concourse. There's no team art anywhere. It's just cement walls. It feels like you're kind of like back in the ancient Rome days. So I'd have to say that one. And then my favorite, it's really hard to pick a favorite because they're all unique in their own way, and they all have their own nice nuances here and there that you kind of look at and be like, hey, that's unique to this type of ballpark. I like AT&T Park in San Francisco. I think is up there in Fenway in Boston.
Cool. Yeah, it was awesome because you talk about the Oakland stadium and how it feels, then you make it sound cool like a Roman Coliseum, but I think what you just mean is there's nothing there except for rock and cement, which is hilarious. That's great. I think that's really interesting. And is there any metaphor a lot of people that love baseball? So say baseball is kind of like life. Do you feel like the game really sort of imitates life? Some people say art imitates life, life imitates art. Some people say baseball imitates life, and life imitates baseball. Would you agree? And in what way?
Yeah, I'd have to say there's a little bit of that in in any sport you talk about. I think you can relate it to something in life, and for baseball, this might not have to do with that, but I definitely think it's the most difficult uh, sport to play, and I can tell you that firsthand because I tried playing high school baseball after years of not playing. I couldn't even make contact with the ball hardly.
It's your hand-eye coordination, right? It's physiology, it's biology, and it's psychology, right? Kind of.
Yeah, you have a guy who's throwing as fast as he can, and you have a guy at the plate who has to react to it as fast as he can. And there's not many sports where you're challenging the mind as much as you can because if you're not on top of your game, um, you can watch interviews. If you blink, the ball's by you, kind of thing. So I just think baseball to me is I don't think there just doesn't get anything more beautiful than a ballpark. I think it's just a majestic game, and a lot of people might think it's boring to watch and stuff. But I think the people that say that they just they sit if they just sit down and have someone teach them the game, I think they'd come to appreciate it.
I think you're right. There's a big difference when you play baseball and understand the relax. You got to understand. You have to be in that alert state of mind. You also have to manage the voices in your head because there's so much time where you could talk yourself in and out of doing well or doing poorly. And I think that's
And I was going to say too that to really I can't think of any other sport that where you can fail 3 times out of 10 and still be considered successful, right? So I
yeah.
think,
Well,
think
I think the market kind of like the players decide that too, right? If you know if they get bad pitchers and you get great, it happens that. But yeah, if I was getting 3 out of 10 on exams in school, or you and I, we probably wouldn't have graduated or passed, right?
yeah, so it can be really taxing on. I think it might not be the toughest game physically to play, and I think it's by far though the most toughest mentally, just because the mental grind that a baseball player can go through. They can go a whole month without getting a base hit, and then you dwell on that, and you think to yourself, man, I'm never gonna get a hit again, right? And then it starts messing with your mechanics. One thing leads to another, and then soon enough, you're kind of back to the drawing books and starting feeling like you're starting all over again, kind of thing, right? It's that type of game. So
Well,
uh,
yeah, in similarity, Sean, to MMA, and if you look at the physiology of a heavy hitter and a physiology of a heavy puncher, there's actually, when it comes to hip movement and swivel and feet, there's actually some great similarities. So I love the fact that you mentioned that. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time with me today. And one of the questions I always like to ask is about one of the most useful lessons that you learned from one of your parents, whether it be your father or your mother. Are you open to sharing something like that?
yeah, I think more so it relates back to what I was saying at the beginning there of how they just always allowed me to do what I wanted to do and be who I wanted to be, and whether they liked it or not, they always encouraged it. um, um, so I'm not obviously if it was something like way out of hand, I'm not saying they encouraging me to smoke cigarettes or anything. But as far as like playing sports goes and stuff, encouraging me to be active and this and that, they're always there to give me rides, always there for the mental support more than anything. So if I have to put my finger on one thing that my parents have done for me, the one word that comes to mind every time is just support. And it might sound cliche, but it's uh it's definitely true. There's not one thing that they really said or done or this or that, but it's more so just always being there, someone to talk to, both my mom and dad.
More like a million things, right? Not
Yeah.
just one thing,
Yeah.
but a million. No, I feel the same way about the way that I was brought up. I really appreciate you taking the time, Sean. Before we get going, if there's anyone out there in MMA that needs a ring announcer in the prairies or outside, how would they get a hold of you to reach out and see if you can get on your schedule for an event?
But you can call probably the easiest way is call my cell phone number. It's 306-540-2020, or just hit me up on Facebook. I'm Sean Kleisinger. I'm sure the spelling of my name's been up on the screen a few times, and so yeah, that's probably the best way. So anyone that needs ring announcer, man, just hit me up. I'll drive 7 hours for it.
That's awesome, my friend. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. We'll put some of those links in at the bottom of the interview on the YouTube channel so you can take a look at it, and we'll go from there. So I just want to say thank you again, my friend, and I look forward to seeing you, us together again in October or November at Modern Fighting Championship. Thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for having me. Take care.